the millionaire who walked away from wealth for a waitress. A decision that shocked everyone. Ethan Hunter sat by the large bay window of his penthouse, staring out at the glittering skyline of New York City. The skyline, which once held the promise of adventure and excitement, now seemed like a cold and distant landscape. The lights twinkling from the skyscrapers below mirrored the hollow feeling inside him. His life, filled with every material possession he could ever wish for, was still desperately empty. The luxurious car collection in the garage, the designer suits, the exclusive parties, none of it mattered. He had the wealth of 100 men, yet no one around him seemed to truly care about who he was beneath the surface. It was a life defined by expectations. Every day, Ethan was surrounded by people who admired him not for his achievements, but for his status, for his family name that had been etched in gold for generations. His friends were more interested in the size of his trust fund than in his thoughts or feelings. He was a symbol, a trophy of success. But behind his impeccable tailored suits and his perfectly manicured smile, there was a deep loneliness that gnawed at him. His parents, powerful figures in the business world, cared more about maintaining their empire than understanding him. The legacy he had inherited felt more like a heavy chain than a gift. Ethan had everything that society deemed important, except the one thing he craved: connection. He had spent his life trying to fill the void with fleeting pleasures, but none of them worked. People came and went, but no one truly knew him. No one cared to. As the weight of his own emptiness settled deeper, Ethan found himself questioning everything. Was this really all there was to life? Was there something more to existence than wealth, power, and status? That's when he decided to escape, just for a day. A simple trip to a diner in a neighborhood far from the lavish world he knew. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a glimpse of something real in the unassuming corners of the world. Something that didn't care about his last name or his fortune. What he didn't know was that this decision would alter his entire life, shattering the illusion of happiness that money had given him. The bell above the diner's door jingled as Ethan walked in, stepping into a world far removed from his own. The scent of fresh coffee, sizzling bacon, and homemade pie filled the air. The clink of plates and the hum of quiet conversations created a warm and inviting atmosphere. It was a far cry from the polished, sterile world of high society. Ethan stood for a moment, scanning the room, unsure of what to expect. Behind the counter, a young woman was wiping down the surface, her dark brown hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore a faded apron that seemed to blend into the retro decor of the diner. Her name tag read Lily, and there was a warmth in her smile that immediately caught his attention. She wasn't like the women in the glittering social circles he was used to. There was no pretension, no calculated charm. Her smile was real, unguarded, as if she had nothing to hide. "Hi there, welcome," she said, her voice soft but confident. Ethan could hear the faintest trace of a southern accent in her words. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, the world outside the diner ceased to exist. It wasn't that Ethan hadn't been around beautiful women before. He had. But there was something about Lily's presence that was different. She wasn't looking at him like he was $1 million investment. She wasn't calculating how his wealth could benefit her future. She saw him, Ethan, the man behind the name. "Table for one?" she asked, raising an eyebrow as she wiped down a nearby table. Ethan nodded, his heart beating a little faster than usual. He sat down, noticing the simplicity of the place, the cracked leather booths, the handwritten menus taped to the wall, the small potted plant on the counter. It was all so real. He felt like an outsider in this space, as though he didn't quite belong. But Lily's presence made him feel a strange sense of peace. She moved around the diner with ease, taking orders, refilling coffee cups, laughing softly with the regulars, never once seeming to be in a hurry. There was a calm confidence about her, as if she knew exactly who she was, and that made Ethan feel both exposed and drawn to her. For the first time in years, Ethan wasn't thinking about business deals or his next social engagement. He was simply present. He watched as Lily interacted with the other customers, listening to her natural laughter, her genuine kindness. As she brought him his coffee, she gave him another smile, a simple gesture that felt more real than anything he had experienced in a long time. "Anything else I can get you?" she asked, her eyes meeting his with an unspoken curiosity. "I'll just take the menu if you don't mind," Ethan replied, his voice a little hoarse, unsure of what to say. Lily nodded and walked away, but not before glancing back over her shoulder. The look she gave him, almost like a silent invitation, stirred something deep inside him. For a brief moment, Ethan wondered if this was how it felt to be truly seen, not for what he owned, but for who he was. As the days passed, Ethan found himself returning to the small diner with an almost compulsive need. He had visited more times in the past week than he had in his entire life, drawn not just by the simple food or the cozy atmosphere, but by Lily. She wasn't like anyone he had ever met. Every time he walked through the door, her soft smile was a comforting reminder that there was more to life than luxury and pretense. In the few moments they shared, Ethan started to feel something he hadn't in years: genuine curiosity, the desire to know another person without masks or hidden motives. Lily, on the other hand, remained blissfully unaware of who Ethan really was. She saw him as a regular customer, someone with a quiet demeanor who always tipped well and ordered the same simple meal: eggs, toast, and black coffee. It was in these moments that Ethan began to realize how little he truly understood about himself. Lily never asked about his background or what he did for a living, which made her one of the few people in his life who didn't view him through the lens of his wealth. It felt liberating. Every conversation with her was an exchange of unguarded thoughts, free from expectations. One afternoon, as he sat sipping his coffee, watching the steam rise in gentle curls, he found himself contemplating the stark contrast between his life and hers. Lily was modest in every way: her worn-out sneakers, her simple hairstyle, her faded apron. Yet, there was a beauty in her simplicity. She exuded a quiet confidence, a contentment in being who she was, with no need for validation from anyone. It was something Ethan had never fully experienced. "Is it always this peaceful here?" Ethan asked one day, leaning back in his chair. He wasn't sure why he asked, but the question seemed to hang in the air, as if it had been waiting to be voiced. Lily smiled, setting down a plate of pancakes in front of a regular customer before returning her attention to him. "It is when you're not rushing through life," she said simply, her voice carrying a wisdom that seemed beyond her years. "Life's too short to spend it chasing after the wrong things, don't you think?" Ethan was taken aback by the calm certainty in her words. She didn't need wealth or status to understand something he had been struggling with for years. That moment, brief as it was, left him unsettled. How had she become so sure of herself, while he, with all his riches, had become so lost? Over the next few days, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about her words. For the first time in a long while, he began to question everything he had built his life upon. He thought of the lavish parties, the endless stream of business deals, the constant need to prove himself to others. It all felt like a game he had never truly wanted to play. But what was he supposed to do now? Could he just walk away from all of it? The truth about Ethan's identity was something he had been carefully guarding, not just from Lily, but from himself. He had enjoyed being seen as just another guy when he was with her. No wealth, no legacy, just two people connecting over simple, honest conversation. But as much as he wanted to keep that illusion intact, there was a moment he knew was coming. The moment Lily would learn who he really was. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The diner was quieter than usual, with only a handful of regulars seated at the counter. Ethan had been sitting there for an hour, lost in thought, when a newspaper was placed gently in front of him. He looked up, startled, and found Lily standing there, a concerned expression on her face. "I didn't know if you saw it, but this came for you," she said softly, pointing to the headline. The large photo on the front page of the city's most prominent paper was unmistakable. It was Ethan, his family's name emblazoned below. The article detailed his recent involvement in a multi-million-dollar business deal, a deal that had been all over the news. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. The world he had tried so hard to hide from Lily was now exposed in front of her, and there was no way to take it back. The newspaper felt like an accusation, a reminder that he could never truly escape the life he had been born into. Lily's gaze softened, but she didn't say anything right away. She simply stood there, waiting for him to speak. Ethan could feel his heart race. The weight of his decision to keep his identity hidden for so long was crashing down on him. He opened his mouth, but the words didn't come. How could he explain this to her? How could he tell her that everything he had shown her was a lie, even though it had been the most honest he had ever felt? Lily finally broke the silence. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady, "why didn't you tell me?" Her eyes searched his, try to understand. "I mean, I never asked, but why keep it a secret? What are you afraid of?" He stared at her for a long moment, struggling with the answer. He wasn't afraid of her. No, it was the world, the judgment he feared. He had always been the son of wealthy parents, groomed for success. And yet it was in her presence, in the simplicity of her world, that he had found something that money couldn't buy. "I didn't want you to see me as just that," he said quietly, his voice almost a whisper. "I didn't want to be just another rich guy to you. I wanted you to see me." Lily regarded him for a long time, her expression unreadable. She finally nodded, her gaze softening. "I don't see you as just another rich guy, Ethan. I see you as someone who's lost, someone who's been looking for something real. But that doesn't change who you are." The words stung, but they were the truth. The illusion was gone. What would happen now? Could they still be the same? Ethan and Lily, two people who had found solace in each other's company, or had his world, with all its wealth and expectations, just torn everything apart? The silence between Ethan and Lily lingered in the diner like a heavy fog. Ethan watched as she carefully folded the newspaper, placing it back on the counter. The cool morning air seemed to freeze the moment, and he could hear the faint clink of cups and silverware in the background. But everything felt distant. It wasn't just the distance between them. It was the distance Ethan had placed between himself and the world that had brought him here. The wealth, the expectations, the legacy. All of it suddenly seemed so small, so irrelevant in the face of the only truth that mattered, Lily. Lily wasn't angry. Not at first, but Ethan could see the confusion in her eyes. She had trusted him, opened up to him, and he had, in some ways, betrayed that trust by hiding the truth about his identity. But it wasn't just that. It was the facade he had built around himself. A carefully curated life that he had desperately clung to for fear of losing everything. He had spent so much of his life building a world of wealth and privilege. But now, sitting across from Lily, all of that seemed hollow. In her eyes, he saw a different kind of value. One that didn't need to be earned or purchased. One that was as real as the air they both breathed. "I never wanted to hide it from you," Ethan said, his voice cracking slightly. "I just didn't want you to think I was like them." He gestured vaguely to the world outside the diner, the world that had always treated him like a commodity, a tool for power and status. "I didn't want you to see me the way they do, like something that can be bought or controlled." Lily's face softened, but there was a hint of sadness in her expression. "Ethan, I never thought of you that way," she said quietly. "But I can't pretend that I didn't feel something was off. You were always distant, like you were keeping something from me. And now I know what it was." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He had hoped she wouldn't notice the subtle shifts, the guarded moments when he had pulled away. But Lily wasn't fooled. She had always been more perceptive than he had realized. "I didn't know how to be anything but what I've always been," Ethan confessed, the weight of his own self-deception pressing down on him. "I didn't know how to be honest with you, because I wasn't being honest with myself. I thought that if I could just keep everything the same, I could keep control. But now," he trailed off, unsure of how to explain the chaos inside him. Lily sat down beside him, her chair scraping softly against the floor. "You've spent so much time trying to keep everything together, Ethan," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But maybe you don't need to control everything. Maybe it's time to let go of the things that are holding you back." Her words struck a chord deep within him. She was right. All this time, Ethan had been holding on to something that wasn't real. His money, his family's name, his social circle. They were all just illusions. He had been running away from the truth of who he was, afraid to face it. But in this moment, with Lily sitting next to him, he realized something profound. He didn't need to be afraid anymore. "I'm scared, Lily," Ethan admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm scared that if I let go of everything, I won't know who I am anymore. I don't know how to live without all of this." Lily's hand found his, and for the first time, he felt a sense of peace. It wasn't a promise that everything would be easy or that they would have all the answers, but it was a promise that, no matter what happened, they would face it together. "You're not alone in this," Lily said, squeezing his hand. "You don't have to have it all figured out. We'll figure it out together." Ethan looked at her, a deep sense of gratitude washing over him. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel like he had to prove anything. He wasn't the heir to a fortune, or the successful businessman his family had always expected him to be. He was just Ethan, and that was enough. But as much as he wanted to believe it, the world outside their little diner was not so forgiving. He could already hear the whispers, the judgment from his family and friends, the expectations that would never go away. But there was one thing he knew for certain now. He had Lily, and that meant more than anything else in the world. The road ahead would be hard, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid of walking it. The decision was made. Ethan had chosen Lily over everything he had ever known, but the reality of that choice was sinking in. He hadn't realized how much of his life had been built on the foundation of wealth and privilege until he found himself standing at the precipice of something completely unfamiliar, a life without it. His first few days without the luxury of his family's financial support were a harsh wake-up call. Everything was different. Ethan struggled to adjust to the realities of a life he had never imagined for himself. He had always taken for granted the ease with which his wealth provided him. Now, there were no personal assistants to make his decisions for him, no private jets to carry him anywhere he wanted to go. There were bills to pay, groceries to buy, and the harsh, unrelenting grind of making ends meet. At first, it was all overwhelming. Ethan found himself standing in the cramped aisle of a grocery store, staring blankly at the shelves. He didn't know what to buy, how to stretch his dollars, or even what was truly necessary. It was a far cry from the lavish dinners and catered events he was used to. But as much as he felt lost in this new world, something inside him was stirring. Something deep within him was beginning to shift. Lily, on the other hand, was in her element. She had lived a life of simplicity and hard work for as long as she could remember. She wasn't fazed by the day-to-day struggles that came with living paycheck to paycheck. What she saw in Ethan was not his ability to solve problems with money, but his willingness to learn, to grow, and to fight for something more. She saw in him the potential to live a life full of purpose and meaning, not just the hollow existence of wealth and excess. One evening, after a long day of moving into their small apartment, Ethan sat down on the couch next to Lily, his mind swirling with doubts and fears. "I don't know if I can do this," he confessed. "I thought I could, but every step feels harder than the last." Lily looked at him with understanding, her hand resting on his. "It's okay to be scared, Ethan," she said softly. "But it's not about doing it perfectly. It's about doing it together." In that moment, Ethan understood something that he hadn't fully grasped before. It wasn't the money that made a life meaningful. It was the people, the relationships, and the love that defined who you truly were. With Lily by his side, he didn't need the wealth he had left behind. Together, they would build a life full of purpose, even if it meant starting from scratch. The weight of Ethan's decision was something that could not be shaken off easily. As the days turned into weeks, he realized that walking away from everything he had known wasn't just a matter of leaving behind a mansion, fine suits, and luxury vacations. It was a complete severance from a world that had defined him. And in that world, there was no place for mistakes. His family's legacy, which had been built on the backs of hard work and privilege, demanded that he uphold it, no questions asked. His absence from the gala, the charity auctions, the board meetings, it all sent shockwaves through the family. But it was the phone call from his father that struck the hardest. "You've made a grave mistake, Ethan." His father's voice was cold, piercing through the receiver like ice. "You're throwing away everything we've worked for. You think you can just walk away from the family, from the life we've built, from the responsibilities?" The words stung, and Ethan felt the familiar old self, the one he had fought so hard to leave behind, creep back in. The son who had always been expected to follow the path laid out for him, to preserve the family name, to do things the right way. It wasn't a choice. It was a duty. Or at least, that's how his father saw it. "I'm not throwing it away, Dad," Ethan said, his voice shaking with a mix of determination and guilt. "I'm choosing a different life. One that's mine, not one that was decided for me." His father's sigh on the other end was heavy, almost dismissive. "You'll regret this. You'll see. That girl, she'll never understand what you've sacrificed, what you've given up for her. I won't stand by and watch you ruin everything." Ethan hung up before his father could say anything more. It wasn't the first time he had been told that his decisions were a disappointment, but this felt different. The sting of rejection from his own father cut deeper than he cared to admit. It wasn't just the money or the power he was letting go of. It was his place in the family, the role he had played for so long. And in choosing Lily, he was rejecting that role. The truth was, Ethan wasn't sure if he could fully walk away from the judgment, from the expectations. No matter how much he tried, the weight of his father's words followed him like a shadow. Later that night, Lily noticed the distance in his eyes. He had been quieter than usual, retreating inward, his usual warmth replaced by a pensive sadness. She had seen him struggle before, but this was different. She could tell that something was gnawing at him, something he wasn't ready to speak about. "You've been quiet all evening," she said gently, sitting beside him on the couch. "What's going on?" Ethan turned to face her, his gaze filled with a vulnerability he hadn't shown before. "I'm scared, Lily. I'm scared that no matter what I do, no matter how hard I try to build something new, it won't be enough. I've already lost so much. My family, they don't understand. I don't think they ever will." Lily took his hand in hers, giving it a reassuring squeeze. "I know it's hard, but you're not alone in this, Ethan. I'm right here with you." "I know," he whispered, the words coming out ragged. "But what if I lose you too? What if I'm not enough for you either?" Her heart ached for him in that moment. She had always known that his past would haunt him, that the expectations would weigh on him. But she also knew that Ethan wasn't just a product of his family or his fortune. He was someone who could shape his own destiny, and she was willing to help him do that, even if it meant facing his demons together. "You are enough for me," she said softly, her voice steady with conviction. "You don't need to be anything more than who you are. And who you are is someone I love. That's all I need." Ethan's eyes welled up, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to lean into the comfort of her words. There was still so much pain, so much loss, but there was something else there too, a glimmer of hope. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in his life, he wasn't facing it alone. The following week, as they sat in their modest apartment, Ethan and Lily started to make plans for the future. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the weight of uncertainty felt unbearable, but they had each other. As they talked, Ethan realized something that both terrified and empowered him. He wasn't just fighting against his past, he was fighting against his own fear of failure. He had never had to fail before, not in the traditional sense. Growing up, Ethan had always been the golden child, the one who succeeded effortlessly in whatever he did. Whether it was school, business, or even socializing, success had been handed to him on a silver platter. But now, with nothing to fall back on but the love of a woman who believed in him, failure seemed inevitable. Ethan spent his days trying to start his own small business, a venture he had always dreamed of but never had the courage to pursue. He had no idea where to begin, no connections to leverage, and certainly no experience in the real world of small businesses. It felt like walking into the unknown, and every step felt heavy with the fear of failure. The weight of his family's expectations loomed over him like an ever-present storm cloud, threatening to pull him back into the life he had left behind. But it was Lily who kept him grounded. She encouraged him to take one small step at a time, to believe in himself the way she believed in him. She knew that this journey wouldn't be easy, that there would be setbacks. But she also knew that Ethan had something that money couldn't buy: determination. One afternoon, as Ethan sat at the small desk in their apartment, drafting his business plan, Lily came over with a cup of coffee. She placed it on the desk in front of him, giving him a reassuring smile. "You've got this," she said simply. Ethan looked at her, his heart full of gratitude. It wasn't just the coffee or the encouragement. It was the way she saw him, the way she believed in him even when he didn't believe in himself. In that moment, he realized that failure didn't have to define him. What mattered was that he was trying, that he was taking control of his own future. With a deep breath, Ethan picked up his pen and began to write again. It was a small step, but it was a step forward, and that was all that mattered. Days turned into weeks, and the weight of uncertainty still clung to Ethan like a second skin. Each morning, he woke up to a starkly different reality, one that didn't come with luxurious sheets, a golden credit card, or the assurance of a safety net. It was a struggle, and some days, the mountain of challenges ahead felt insurmountable. His hands, once used to signing checks and making business deals, now fumbled over the unfamiliar task of making something from nothing. Every misstep, every wrong turn seemed to mock him, reminding him of how far he had fallen. But what stung the most wasn't the lack of money or success. It was the quiet voice in his head that whispered, "What if you can't do it?" One evening, after a particularly difficult day, Ethan sat on the edge of their modest bed, his mind reeling with doubts. He hadn't been able to secure the funding he needed for his business, and the few contacts he had tried to reach out to were either too busy or too uninterested to help. Lily had stayed up late the night before, listening to him vent, offering words of encouragement that felt like warm light in the darkness. But tonight, there was a palpable sense of defeat in the air. "Lily, what if I'm not cut out for this?" Ethan's voice was quieter than usual, tinged with the vulnerability he had long kept hidden. "What if everything I've done so far is just a series of mistakes? I don't know what I'm doing." Lily walked into the room, her silhouette framed by the soft light from the kitchen. She hadn't heard Ethan speak this way before, so raw, so stripped of the pride and confidence that had once defined him. But instead of responding with pity, she sat down beside him, her hand reaching out to hold his. "Look at me, Ethan," she said softly, her voice steady despite the weight of his words. "I know you're scared. I see it. But that doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're trying. That's something people like your father will never understand. They've never known what it's like to feel the fear of starting from scratch, to build something with nothing but faith in yourself." Her words sunk deep, and for a moment, Ethan was silent, feeling both the sting of truth and the warmth of her belief in him. He hadn't realized how much he had longed for someone to see him, not for his money or his family name, but for who he truly was. "I'm trying, Lily," he said after a long pause, his voice hoarse. "But I'm terrified I'm going to let you down, that everything we've worked for will collapse before it even begins." Lily leaned her head on his shoulder, resting there as if she could carry the weight of his fears for him. "You're not alone in this. Whatever happens, we're in it together. And no matter what the world thinks, no matter what your family thinks, that's enough." Ethan felt the tightness in his chest ease ever so slightly. She was right. He wasn't alone anymore. He had someone who believed in him more than he believed in himself. For the first time in a long time, the noise of doubt quieted. It didn't disappear, but it wasn't as deafening as it had been before. Lily's steady presence in his life had become the anchor he so desperately needed. And it wasn't just about finding success. It was about finding peace in the journey, no matter how hard it was. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a sense of resolve he hadn't felt in days. The exhaustion from the previous nights hadn't gone away, but something had shifted. He was tired of feeling defeated. He was tired of doubting himself. He had come this far, not just for Lily, but for himself, to prove that he wasn't just a byproduct of his wealth, but someone who could make something of his own. He went to the small cafe where he and Lily often spent their mornings. The cafe was modest, the kind of place where the coffee was served in chipped mugs and the chairs creaked with age. But it was a place where people spoke to each other, not just to network or to climb the social ladder, but because they cared. The kind of place Ethan hadn't been used to. It was a reminder of everything he was fighting for. As he sat at their usual table, notebook in front of him, Ethan felt a shift in his mind. He wasn't just thinking about numbers and strategies. He wasn't trying to fit into a mold that had been dictated by others. He was thinking about people about how his new venture could actually help people like Lily, like his father had always warned him not to help. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be fast, but it was going to be real. Lily sat across from him, watching him with a quiet anticipation, as if she knew that something had changed in him, something important. "What are you thinking?" she asked gently. Ethan looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time in a long time, a smile tugged at the corner of his lips. "I'm thinking that this business is not just about money. It's about giving people a chance, a real chance, a chance to build something they can be proud of." Lily's eyes lit up. "That's exactly it, Ethan. You don't have to be a billionaire to make a difference. You just have to care." In that moment, Ethan realized that the dream he had always wanted, the life he had been striving for, was finally taking shape. Not as a product of his wealth, but as a product of his heart. And though the road ahead was uncertain, he knew that with Lily by his side, it was a road worth walking. The days following Ethan's renewed sense of purpose were not without their challenges. He felt a pressure that was unlike anything he had encountered before, a weight that settled heavily on his chest every time he thought about his venture. It wasn't just the fear of failure, though that was certainly present, but the constant shadow of his family's expectations, the overwhelming sense that no matter how hard he worked, it would never be enough to earn their approval. Every phone call with his father, every message from his mother, reminded him of the life he had left behind. They weren't just concerned with his financial stability. They were concerned with his reputation, with the image of their family that had been carefully curated for generations. "You're not going to throw all of this away for a woman, are you?" his father had asked him during their last conversation. His voice was as cold and cutting as ever, devoid of the affection that once seemed endless. "No, I'm not throwing it away," Ethan had replied, trying to steady his own voice. "I'm choosing something different, something real." But no matter how he tried to explain, his father refused to hear it. The world he was stepping into, the world of modest dreams and humble beginnings, was foreign to his family. They didn't understand how someone could walk away from everything they had worked for, especially when it meant abandoning the luxury, power, and influence that were their birthright. The expectations were suffocating. Ethan sat alone in their small living room, staring out the window at the city skyline, which no longer felt as grand to him. It felt distant, almost foreign. The city that had once symbolized everything he had aspired to now represented a life he was leaving behind, a life that no longer fit the person he was becoming. He thought of Lily, who was busy at the cafe, putting in long hours without complaint, her heart still as open as it had been the first time they met. She was so different from everyone he had ever known, and yet she was the one who had made him feel like he could breathe again. "Ethan?" Lily's voice pulled him from his thoughts. He looked up to see her standing in the doorway, her expression a mixture of concern and understanding. She could see the strain in his face, the way his eyes held a sadness he had never shared before. It was a sadness that came from the knowledge that he was walking a path that few understood, and one that even fewer would support. "I'm fine," he said quickly, forcing a smile, but she wasn't fooled. She stepped into the room and sat beside him, her presence as steady as ever. She didn't ask him what was wrong. She didn't need to. Ethan knew she understood. "I talked to my father today," Ethan began, his voice low. "He doesn't get it, Lily. He doesn't understand why I'm choosing this life." "I know," she said softly, her hand gently resting on his. "But this is your choice, Ethan. You're the one who has to live with it, not them." Her words, simple yet profound, felt like a balm to the wound that had been reopening every time he spoke to his family. In the face of his father's relentless expectations, Lily's unconditional support was the anchor that kept him grounded. She wasn't asking him to justify his decisions, nor was she questioning his path. She believed in him, even when he struggled to believe in himself. "Do you ever wonder if we're making the right decision?" Ethan asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lily smiled, her eyes shining with a quiet confidence. "I don't wonder, Ethan. I know we are, because no matter what, we're choosing love over fear. And that's always the right choice." The weight of his family's expectations felt a little lighter, and for the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself to believe that Lily was right. The world he had once known, his family, his wealth, his status, wasn't the only path to happiness. He had found something deeper, something more meaningful with her. And as he sat there beside her, he knew that no matter how hard the journey ahead would be, as long as they faced it together, it would be worth it. It was a quiet Tuesday morning when Ethan found himself standing in front of the small storefront they had finally secured for his business. The building was far from impressive, and its faded sign didn't exactly scream success. But to Ethan, it felt like everything. It was a symbol of his new life, one built on the values he had come to cherish over the past few months. It was a chance to make a difference in a world that, until now, had seemed so distant from his own. Lily had been with him every step of the way, helping to set up, helping him with the paperwork, with the logistics. She had become more than just his partner in love. She had become his partner in this new venture, helping him shape a vision he hadn't even realized was possible. Together, they had chosen to create something that could give back to people who, like them, were searching for a way to begin again. It wasn't about making millions, it was about making a difference. And that, Ethan realized, was worth more than all the money in the world. But the reality of their new life hit them harder than they had anticipated. Their savings were quickly dwindling, and despite their best efforts, the business wasn't attracting the kind of attention they had hoped for. Ethan had always been used to success, always had a safety net. But now, there were no guarantees. Every day felt like a battle to stay afloat, and there were times when he found himself wondering if he had made the biggest mistake of his life. Lily noticed the worry in his eyes, even when he tried to hide it. She knew how much this meant to him. She had seen him struggle, seen him face his own self-doubt, and yet she never wavered. She believed in him, in them, more than anyone else ever could. One evening, as they sat down to dinner, the quiet tension between them was palpable. Ethan put his fork down, staring at his plate, his thoughts miles away. "I'm scared, Lily," he said, his voice barely audible. "I'm scared that this is all falling apart. That maybe I wasn't cut out for this after all." Lily didn't answer right away. She reached across the table and took his hand, her touch warm and steady. "You're scared because you care. But being scared doesn't mean you're failing. It means you're growing." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, Ethan allowed himself to believe them. He had come this far, with Lily by his side. And though the road ahead was still uncertain, he knew that together, they could face anything. Ethan sat alone in the back of the small cafe, his eyes fixed on the unopened pile of invoices that Lily had handed him that morning. The numbers were a stark reminder of the harsh reality they faced. Their savings were nearly gone, and their dream of building a business that would help others seemed to be slipping further away with each passing day. He hadn't told Lily yet, but he knew. Deep down, he could feel the weight of it all, crushing him slowly, suffocating his hopes. It wasn't just the money. Ethan had never been poor, never known what it was like to wonder if the rent would get paid or if there would be enough to eat. He had always had an escape, a fallback, a safety net that would catch him if he stumbled. But now, there was no safety. Every decision they made, every risk they took, came with the crushing realization that there might not be a way out if they failed. The thought of going back to his family, to the life he had abandoned, felt like swallowing a bitter pill. He had already burned so many bridges. His father's disapproving words echoed in his mind. "You can't escape who you are, Ethan. You'll come back to us. You'll see." It was a threat he hadn't wanted to hear, yet a part of him feared it might come true. Lily had always been the light in his darkness, the constant in his chaos. But today, even her warmth felt distant. As much as he wanted to protect her from the weight of their struggles, he knew she could see the shift in him. She knew that the person who had been so hopeful, so determined to change, was now faltering. And he hated himself for it. He hated that he couldn't give her the life she deserved, that the dream they had built together might not survive the harshness of reality. The door to the cafe opened with a soft chime, and Ethan looked up, startled. Lily walked in, her face tired but determined, the weight of the day heavy on her shoulders. When she saw him sitting there, staring at the pile of bills, she didn't say anything at first. She just walked over to him and sat down, her presence stilling the turbulent thoughts racing through his mind. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice steady but with an undercurrent of concern. "What's going on? You haven't said a word all morning." He shook his head, trying to force a smile, but it felt hollow. "I'm fine, Lily. Just tired." But she wasn't fooled. Lily had always been able to read him better than anyone else, and she knew something was wrong. Her hand reached across the table, gently touching his. "You're not fine," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "We're in this together. We've always been in this together. Whatever it is, you don't have to carry it alone." For a moment, Ethan considered telling her everything. The fear, the doubt, the suffocating weight of failure. But the words caught in his throat. How could he admit that he was close to losing everything? How could he tell her that the dream they had fought so hard for might just be too big, too fragile to survive? "I'm scared," Ethan finally admitted, the words tumbling out before he could stop them. "I'm scared that I made the wrong choice. I thought I could do this, Lily. I thought I could build something real with you. But what if I'm just failing?" Lily's eyes softened, her fingers tightening around his. "You're not failing, Ethan. We're not failing. We're just fighting. And sometimes fighting is all we can do." Her words pierced through the fear that had been consuming him. She wasn't angry. She wasn't blaming him. She was standing by him, as she always had. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. He couldn't give up. He couldn't walk away. Not from her, not from their dream. "I don't know how to keep going," Ethan whispered, his voice breaking. "But I know that I want to keep going with you." Lily's eyes glistened with unshed tears, but she smiled, her expression full of quiet strength. "Then we'll keep going. Together." In that moment, Ethan realized that no matter how hard it got, no matter how many obstacles stood in their way, he had something far more powerful than money or status. He had her, and with Lily by his side, he knew they could face anything. The next few days passed in a blur of early mornings and late nights. Ethan and Lily were working harder than ever before, but there was something different in the air. A renewed sense of purpose had settled between them, one that transcended fear and doubt. They were no longer just fighting to survive. They were fighting for something they both believed in. Despite the growing pile of bills, despite the mounting pressure, they found small victories in the day-to-day. A customer left a generous tip. A local news station featured a story about their small business. Ethan couldn't help but smile at the thought that maybe, just maybe, they were starting to make a difference. One evening, after the cafe had closed and the last customer had left, Ethan sat at the counter, looking out at the empty street. The sound of Lily cleaning up in the back of the cafe seemed distant, almost surreal. For the first time in a long while, he felt a quiet peace. Lily came up behind him, her footsteps soft against the wooden floor. She placed her hands on his shoulders and leaned down to kiss him on the cheek. The simple gesture was everything to him, more than any luxury or fortune he had ever known. "You okay?" she asked, her voice light but filled with concern. Ethan turned to look at her, his heart swelling with love. He had been through so much, felt so lost for so long. But now, here he was standing on the other side of the struggle, with her. He had everything he needed. "I'm more than okay," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "I'm exactly where I need to be." In that moment, Ethan realized that the struggle, the fear, and the uncertainty, they were all part of the journey. They were the fire that would forge them into something stronger. And whatever the future held, he knew that he would face it with Lily by his side. Because in the end, love wasn't just about grand gestures or a life of luxury. It was about choosing each other every single day, no matter the cost. The days had started to blend together for Ethan. Early mornings at the cafe became routine, and long nights, filled with the quiet hum of the refrigerator and the clink of coffee cups, had become his reality. But despite the exhaustion, there was a sense of fulfillment he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the financial success he had once imagined, but something more profound. The bond with Lily had deepened, and the weight of doubt that once burdened him was slowly lifting, piece by piece. Yet, even in this newfound peace, the world outside continued to test them. The phone rang late one night while Ethan was wiping down the counter. He glanced at the screen and saw his father's name flash across it. His heart skipped a beat. The last time he had spoken to his father, their conversation had been an argument about his decision to leave behind everything for a woman who wasn't worthy of him. The harsh words echoed in his mind even now, but something inside him urged him to pick up the phone. Taking a deep breath, Ethan swiped the screen and answered. "Ethan." His father's voice came through, gruff and disapproving as ever. "You're still doing this, aren't you?" Ethan felt his jaw tighten. The disappointment in his father's voice was palpable. "Yes, Dad, I'm still doing it." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Ethan could almost hear the struggle his father was going through, trying to hold on to his control, trying to convince himself that this was just a phase. "I don't get it," his father continued, his voice quieter now. "I don't understand why you're throwing your life away for some girl. You had everything. The world was yours, Ethan. Why choose this?" The bitterness in his father's tone stung, but Ethan wasn't about to back down. The silence between them stretched longer this time. Ethan's mind swirled, thoughts running in circles as he thought about all the things he could say. About his mother, about the hollow existence he had once lived, about the life he had chosen to create with Lily. "I've never felt more alive, Dad," Ethan said, his voice steady despite the rising tension. "Maybe I didn't understand it before, but I do now. It's not about the money or the power. It's about the person I want to be. And Lily, she's the one who's shown me what that really means. I'm not throwing my life away. I'm building it." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment, Ethan thought his father might hang up. But then his father spoke again, his voice soft but carrying a weight of regret. "I just want what's best for you, Ethan. I want you to have everything you deserve. I have everything I need," Ethan replied quietly. "And that's enough for me." The conversation ended there, and Ethan sat in the stillness of the cafe, feeling a strange sense of peace. He knew that nothing had really changed. His father would never fully accept his choices. But for the first time in a long time, Ethan felt like he had made the right decision. The love he had found with Lily was worth more than any inheritance or status. It was worth fighting for, and that's exactly what he was doing. Lily came out from the back, her apron still on, and saw the contemplative look on Ethan's face. She had noticed the tension in the air, but she waited patiently, not pushing him. She knew how hard it was for him to confront his past, especially when it came to his family. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice gentle. Ethan turned toward her, a tired but genuine smile on his face. "Yeah, everything's fine," he said, stepping closer to her. "I just realized something. I'm not alone in this anymore. I have you." Lily's eyes softened, and she reached up to touch his cheek, her hand warm against his skin. "And you always will." In that moment, something clicked for Ethan. It wasn't just about their business or the financial struggles they faced. It wasn't about proving anyone wrong or escaping from his family's expectations. It was about the simple, powerful truth that he had found something real, something worth more than anything he had ever imagined. He had found love, not just with Lily, but with himself. And that was the key to everything. Ethan and Lily's life together hadn't been easy, but it had been filled with moments of unexpected beauty. As the weeks passed, they found ways to make their business grow, slowly but surely. It wasn't the overnight success that Ethan had once dreamed of, but it was steady. Their small cafe had developed a loyal following, and word of mouth had started to bring in more customers. The town, once indifferent to their humble venture, was beginning to take notice. One morning, as they prepared for another busy day, Ethan stood behind the counter, looking out the window at the quiet street. It was early, and the sun had just begun to rise, casting a warm glow over the buildings. For the first time in months, Ethan felt a sense of stability, something he hadn't realized he was craving until now. They had built this together. Every small success, every challenge they had overcome had led them here. Lily walked over to him, a cup of coffee in hand. She handed it to him with a playful smile, and Ethan couldn't help but chuckle. It was moments like this, quiet, simple, and full of warmth, that made everything worth it. The life they had now was far from perfect, but it was theirs. It was real. "I think we might actually make it," Ethan said, looking down at her. "This place, our future, It's starting to feel real. Lily's eyes sparkled as she leaned in to kiss him softly. Of course we will. We've already made it, Ethan. Together. And as they stood there, side by side, Ethan realized that the world they had built, the life they had fought for, was something far more valuable than any fortune. The love they shared had created a foundation stronger than any inheritance. It was a life worth living, a story worth telling. Together, they had risen from the ashes of their past, and together, they would continue to rise, no matter what the future held. It was a crisp morning when the first real test of their new life arrived. The cafe had been growing steadily, but it was still fragile. The kind of fragile that made every unexpected cost, every slow morning, feel like a potential threat. Ethan and Lily had been pushing through, focusing on making their dream a reality. But the weight of uncertainty had never really left. They both had moments of doubt, but they kept moving forward together. Until one day when the phone call came, Lily was cleaning the counters when Ethan picked up the phone. His face immediately tensed as he recognized the number, his lawyer. The man who had once handled the family's estate. Mr. Clark, the lawyer's voice came through the phone, formal and distant, a stark contrast to the warmth of Lily's presence just a few feet away. I have an urgent matter to discuss regarding the family trust. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The family trust was the cornerstone of the wealth that had once been his. His inheritance, his birthright. What could they want now? Ethan nodded to himself, keeping his tone steady. What's going on? The trust has placed a condition on your assets, Ethan. It's come to our attention that you've been diverging from the family's expectations, the lawyer continued. They're not pleased with your decision to leave everything behind. They've decided to cut you out of the inheritance entirely unless you return to the fold. If you don't, the estate will be reassigned. The words hit Ethan like a ton of bricks. It was no longer just about his relationship with Lily. It was now a battle for survival. His past was coming back to haunt him. The riches he had abandoned for love now felt as distant as a fading dream. His father, his family, they had already begun to strip him of his future. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He could feel the blood rushing to his head, the weight of the decision crushing him all over again. The inheritance had never meant this much before. But now, it felt like the final act of a story he hadn't written. His mind flashed back to the phone call with his father. The words his father had said, that he had always wanted the best for him, and now the best was being dangled like a lifeline. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was no longer just about him. It was about Lily, about the life they were trying to build. As he hung up the phone, Lily walked over, her expression soft but confused as she noticed the sudden tension in his face. "What is it?" she asked, her voice quiet with concern. "They've cut me off," Ethan said, his voice raw. "The trust, the inheritance, it's all gone. If I don't return to the family, I lose everything." For a moment, Lily stood still, her brow furrowing as she processed the news. Then, without hesitation, she walked to him, taking his hands in hers. "Ethan," she said, her voice low but full of strength. "We've already built something. We have this place. We have each other. This doesn't change who we are or what we've started." Ethan looked at her, eyes filled with conflict. The weight of the situation threatened to crush him, but her unwavering gaze steadied him. He had made his choice, but now that choice was being tested. Was it worth it? Was this life he was building with Lily enough to replace everything he had left behind? Lily stepped closer, resting her forehead against his. "We'll face this together, Ethan. No matter what. You don't have to go back. Not for them." Her words hit him in a place he hadn't known he needed. The panic that had gripped his chest slowly began to fade, replaced by a quiet resolve. The inheritance was gone, but he had Lily. He had the love he'd been searching for his whole life. And that was worth more than anything else. Ethan squeezed her hands. "I won't go back. I can't. I don't need their approval anymore. I have you." Lily's smile was small, but it was enough to make Ethan feel like he could stand against the world. They had already lost so much, but in the face of this, they had each other. And that was a strength neither of them had ever known before. The news that Ethan had been cut off from the family fortune spread quickly. Word of his decision to abandon his inheritance for a life with a waitress became fodder for local gossip, drawing attention from all corners. Some admired his courage, while others, especially the wealthy elites, criticized him for what they saw as reckless abandon. His former friends called him a fool, but Ethan, now more than ever, knew that he had made the right decision. The cafe, while growing, also felt the weight of their choices. Without the cushion of wealth to fall back on, every move they made felt like it could determine whether they would rise or fall. But as difficult as the days were, Ethan never felt alone. Lily, always a quiet force of strength, worked tirelessly by his side, never once showing any signs of doubt or fear. They didn't have much, but they had something far more valuable: resilience. Every morning they opened the cafe. They were faced with new challenges, but with each obstacle came an opportunity for growth. And with every success, no matter how small, it became clearer that they were building something sustainable, real. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, the pressure mounted once again. One afternoon, as Ethan and Lily were closing up for the day, a shadow fell across the doorway. A man in a sharp suit stood in the entrance, his presence immediately commanding attention. Ethan straightened, recognizing him immediately. Gregory Reed, a business partner of his family's estate. "You're still holding on to this charade?" Gregory's voice was low, almost mocking. "You really think this is going to work? Your family's never going to let you go. They'll come for you again. They always do." Ethan stood tall, his back straight. "This isn't a charade. This is my life, and I've already made my choice." Gregory's smile was thin, but it held a trace of something darker. "Then I guess we'll see how long you can keep running from the past." With that, he turned and walked out, leaving Ethan and Lily standing in the middle of their small cafe, the weight of his words hanging in the air. For the first time since leaving his old life behind, Ethan felt the walls closing in on him. But as he looked at Lily, standing beside him, he knew one thing for sure: no matter what came next, they would face it together. The days following Gregory Reed's visit were filled with tension. The cafe was struggling more than ever. Despite their hard work, the bills piled up, and the debts loomed like an unyielding shadow over their lives. Ethan and Lily had poured everything into the business, but it seemed that no matter how many hours they worked or how many customers they served, the mountain of financial hardship only grew taller. Ethan, once used to a life where money was never an issue, was now consumed by the stress of trying to keep things afloat. He would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sounds of Lily's soft breathing beside him. His heart ached with the thought of disappointing her. She had given up so much to stand by him, to believe in their dream. And yet, the pressure of it all made him question whether he had made the right choice. One evening, after the cafe closed, Lily sat across from him at the small table they had grown so accustomed to. Her hands were wrapped around a warm cup of coffee, her eyes tired but steady. There was a quiet resilience in her gaze that Ethan couldn't quite describe. "We'll get through this, Ethan," she said, her voice calm but firm. "You've been through worse, and we've come so far. We're not giving up now." Ethan smiled weakly, but the worry in his chest only deepened. "I don't want to disappoint you, Lily. You deserve more than this. You deserve a life that isn't filled with constant struggle. You've given everything, and I don't want to fail you." Lily leaned forward, placing a hand on his. "We're in this together, remember? You didn't fail me when you chose this life. You didn't fail me when you chose love over wealth. We have each other, and that's enough. We will find a way." Ethan's chest tightened at her words. The weight of his own fears was almost suffocating, but Lily's faith in him, in them, made him feel something he hadn't felt in years: hope. Even in the face of everything falling apart, Lily's belief in their future remained unshaken. He kissed her hand softly, grateful for her strength. "I don't know what I'd do without you. We'll figure it out," she whispered. One step at a time, as they sat there in the quiet of their small cafe, Ethan felt something shift inside him. Maybe it wasn't about the money or the grandiose life he had once lived. Maybe it wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about the two of them fighting together. And that, he realized, was worth more than anything his past had ever offered. The sun was setting on the horizon, painting the sky with hues of pink and orange as Ethan and Lily stood outside the cafe, their hands clasped together. The weight of the past few months had been heavy, but the horizon ahead finally felt clear. Things had not been easy, but they had persevered. And with time, the hard work they had put into the cafe began to pay off. Slowly but surely, they began to see small but steady progress. The community, having witnessed their struggles and determination, had started to rally around them. Regular customers became friends. Word of their story, the story of a young man who left behind a life of luxury to pursue love and purpose, began to spread. The cafe, once a symbol of uncertainty, had become a beacon of hope for those who believed in second chances. But for Ethan, the greatest transformation wasn't the cafe's success, it was his own. As the weeks passed, Ethan realized that he had come full circle. The man who had once been consumed by his family's wealth, who had craved validation through material possessions, had now found peace in the simplicity of a life lived with purpose. His happiness was no longer measured by the number of zeros in his bank account, but by the quiet moments spent with Lily, building something they both believed in. One evening, as the cafe was closing, a familiar face appeared at the door. It was Gregory Reed. His sharp suit, as always, stood in stark contrast to the warmth of the cafe's humble interior. "Thought I'd find you here," Gregory said, his voice laced with something between amusement and grudging respect. Ethan stood from behind the counter, wiping his hands on his apron. He didn't feel the usual anxiety or frustration that Gregory's presence used to provoke. There was something different now, something unshakable in him. "I see things are better for you," Gregory continued, his gaze flickering around the cafe. "I was wrong to think you'd fail." Ethan met his gaze without hesitation. "This is where I'm meant to be. I may have lost the inheritance, but I found something far more valuable. I'm at peace." Gregory's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he couldn't quite comprehend Ethan's contentment. "And Lily? You still think she's worth it?" Ethan smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. More than anything, Gregory didn't respond immediately. He lingered for a moment, almost as if weighing the sincerity in Ethan's words. Finally, with a small nod, he turned to leave. "You've made your choice, Ethan," Gregory said quietly before stepping outside. "But don't be surprised if it comes back to haunt you." Ethan didn't answer. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching Gregory walk away, but his heart was light. He had already faced the hardest challenge, the battle within himself. Everything else, he realized, was just noise. When he turned back to Lily, who had been watching from across the room, he felt a quiet certainty settle over him. "We did it," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Lily smiled, her eyes soft but full of strength. "Yes, we did, and now we get to live it." As they stood there together, the cafe around them humming with the quiet energy of their shared victory, Ethan realized that the love he had once thought was impossible, the life he had once feared was too difficult to build, was the very thing that had saved him. He didn't need the riches of the past or the approval of his family. He only needed Lily, the woman who had shown him what it meant to live with heart. Together, they were building something real, and that, Ethan knew, was worth everything. In a world where success is often measured by wealth and status, Ethan's journey reminds us that true fulfillment lies not in what we have, but in who we love and how we live. His decision to walk away from a life of privilege to pursue a deeper, more meaningful existence is a testament to the power of love and self-discovery. Isn't it time we all question what truly matters in our own lives? If Ethan's story has touched your heart, share it with others who might need a reminder that love and purpose are worth more than any fortune. Like, comment, and share if you believe that true happiness comes from living authentically. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories that inspire, challenge, and transform. The journey of self-realization never ends. Join us, and let's continue this adventure together.